Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, had a personal interest in transmitting speech. His mother was almost completely deaf. His grandfather specialized in treating people with speech difficulties such as lisping. His father taught deaf people to speak and gained fame for inventing visible speech, an alphabet that provided a written symbol for almost every sound a human voice can make. Bell was born in Scotland and studied at the University of London. His family moved to Canada, and there he began teaching deaf students. As Bell grew older, he was driven by two passions: to do some good in the world and to invent. He fed his first passion by moving to Boston, Massachusetts, where he opened a school to train teachers of the deaf. As an inventor, Bell set to work on improving the telegraph. But when he heard that other inventors were working on a telegraph that could transmit sound, he decided to try to do the same thing. Bell did not know much about electricity, but he hired someone who did, a mechanic named Thomas Watson. Month after month, Bell and Watson tinkered with currents and switches, reeds and strings. One night, Watson plucked a reed-like part on a device he was handling. The same tone twanged out of the box near Bell. The inventors pondered the apparatus, and suddenly Bell understood how to make a telephone. It took months to build what Bell envisioned, but on March 10th, 1876, he was ready. Sending Watson to another room, Bell prepared to test his transmitter. Suddenly he spilled some battery acid on his clothes and cried out, "Mr. Watson, come here! I want to see you!" Those turned out to be the first words spoken by telephone. Watson rushed to tell his boss that he had heard every word clearly. That June, Bell took his device to the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition, a giant celebration of America's 100th birthday, where visitors could see the latest inventions and products. 10 million people attended the exposition. At first, few of them visited Bell's little booth. It looked as though his invention would go unnoticed. Then, into Bell's exhibit walked Pedro II, the Emperor of Brazil. He stopped to chat with the inventor. Crowds followed the Emperor wherever he went, so with hordes of people, including reporters, watching, Bell demonstrated his invention to the Emperor, who could only stammer, I hear! Suddenly word began to spread about Bell's remarkable device. Bell and a business partner started the Bell Telephone Company in 1877. The company began stringing lines and installing telephones in offices and homes. By 1891, a telephone line ran between London and Paris. The next year, phone service began between New York City and Chicago. For the first time in history, people could use the power of electricity to talk with each other across vast distances. By 1900, there were 1.4 million telephones in use around the country. A subsidiary of the Bell Telephone Company, the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, AT&T, became one of the most powerful monopolies in history until it was broken up in the 1980s. Edison and electricity. Thomas Alva Edison was the most prolific inventor of the age, indeed of any age. Edison had lost most of his hearing as a boy. He later refused an operation that might have restored his hearing. He often said that his hearing impairment allowed him to concentrate on his work without distraction. From his boyhood, Edison was a relentless tinkerer and inventor. He maintained that negative results in experiments were just as valuable as positive. After many unsuccessful attempts to develop an early form of battery, he is reported to have said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Edison's persistence and determination come through in another famous statement: "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." Edison used the profits from his early inventions to build what he called an invention factory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, which drew some of the best inventive minds in the United States, as well as a number from other countries, to join him. Eventually, he built an even bigger laboratory in the town of West Orange, New Jersey. Edison's invention factory was itself a sort of invention, a research and development lab. Today, many corporations have R&D facilities where they focus on developing new products. Edison once said, "I find out what the world needs, then I go ahead and invent it." He urged his colleagues to come up with practical inventions that would improve everyday life, and, along the way, to secure patents that would earn their livelihood and make Edison himself a very rich man. Among the inventions at Edison's lab were a phonograph to record and play back sound, and one of the first motion picture cameras. When he died in 1931, Edison held more than 1,000 patents. One of Edison's early goals was to invent a telephone, but Bell beat him to it. Edison went right to work on other ideas. One of his new projects was figuring out how to use electricity to make light. Many other inventors were after the same thing. Edison and his rivals all knew that they could make a filament, a thread-like conductor, glow by passing electric current through it. What if the filament could be made to glow so brightly that it could light a room? It sounded like a good idea, but no one had discovered how to make it work. The problem was, as the filament began to shine brightly, it grew so hot that it burned to cinders. In 1876, Edison solved this problem. He and his colleagues managed to get improved results by pumping all of the air out of a glass bulb. When sealed in the vacuum within the bulb, the filament can still glow, but deprived of oxygen, it was less likely to burn up. Edison kept trying to find the right material for the filament, and at last he succeeded. After many trials, he finally found that a bulb with a carbon filament would stay lit for more than 40 hours. Although Edison did not invent the first incandescent light, or the light bulb as it is usually called, he figured out how to make a light bulb that really worked. Soon after, Lewis Howard Latimer, an African-American inventor who worked for a rival of Edison, patented an improved process for producing carbon filaments. In the early 1880s, Latimer was hired by the Edison Electric Light Company. Westinghouse and alternating current. Of course, light bulbs need electricity to power them. In 1882, Edison set up a power distribution system to deliver electricity to a small part of New York City. He went on to invent wiring systems and switches to carry the electric current to homes and businesses. He invented devices that could measure the flow of electricity so that people could be charged for what they used. In short, he created an electric company. Edison's system of providing electric power relied on direct current, which could not be effectually transmitted over long distances. The solution, alternating current, AC, was championed by another inventor and entrepreneur, George Westinghouse. While still a young man, Westinghouse invented the air brake for trains. He eventually moved from the railroad equipment business to electrical equipment. When Edison decided that alternating current was too dangerous to use, Westinghouse resolved to prove him wrong. Edison and Westinghouse engaged in a fierce rivalry over their competing systems to deliver electricity. Edison tried to arouse public fear of the dangers of the alternating current system. In the end, science won out over these fear tactics. In 1895, Westinghouse used the waters of Niagara Falls to power an AC generating system and send electricity to 25 miles to downtown Buffalo, New York. He used generators devised by the Serbian-American inventor Nikola Tesla. Tesla also invented the first practical AC motor. Westinghouse paid him $1 million for the patents to the motor and related equipment. By the end of the century, a grid of electric interconnections spread across the nation. Electricity powered many factories and workplaces. Electric lights were changing the way people lived. Prior to electric lighting, people relied on candles and oil lamps, which could be costly to use and sometimes dangerous. Sunset ended the productive hours of the day. Few people read, sewed, or traveled after dark. But the widespread use of electrical lighting extended the time for both productivity and leisure. At the flip of a switch, there was light to do what one needed or wanted. Photography for all. In 1877, when he was 23, George Eastman bought a camera to take on a trip to the Great Lakes. Although photography had been around for almost 40 years, because of complex materials and procedures, its use was limited to a small number of professionals. On his trip to the Great Lakes, Eastman had to transport a small chemical lab and then construct a darkroom to prepare a glass plate for each shot. One ought to be able to carry less than a pack horse load, he believed. Eastman made it his life's work to make photography simple and accessible. He figured out how to replace the glass plates with disposable rolls of prepared paper. He used film made of nitrocellulose, a very early plastic, and packed it into a camera he called the Kodak, a word he made up. In 1900, he invented the Brownie point-and-shoot camera, priced at just $1, and sold 250,000 in the first year. "You press the button, we do the rest," became the slogan of his Eastman Kodak company. Eastman's invention made photography available to almost anyone, with no need for technical know-how. Millions of people started recording their lives in pictures. A new corporation. By 1890, Thomas Edison had taken steps to merge his various business efforts into the Edison General Electric Company. About this time, he was facing competition from the Thomson-Houston Company. In 1892, the financier J.P. Morgan negotiated a merger between the two competitors. The new company, known as the General Electric Company, remains one of the largest corporations in the world. The disassembly line. In the late 1800s, innovators created not only new devices but also new processes. One of these new processes changed the way that meat got to American dinner tables. Prior to the late these, individual butchers kill and process livestock, one animal at a time. But the new titans of the meat industry, among them Gustavus Swift, whose name endures on supermarket products today, decided to copy the growing mass production model being adopted by factories. In Swift's Chicago slaughterhouses, one worker pushed a steer down a ramp. Another workman killed it with a sledgehammer. Then a meat hook from an overhead conveyor swept up the animal. The steer passed by men who skinned it, gutted it, and butchered it, up to 78 jobs in all. It was a complex process, but allowed much quicker production of meat products. Swift also pioneered the use of refrigerated railroad cars and warehouses with distribution networks linking them. Some years later, men working for Henry Ford visited Swift's disassembly line. It inspired Ford's famous automobile assembly line, on which cars were put together along a moving conveyor. Nice.